Welcome to the Always On podcast. I'm your host, Duncan MacPherson. And on this podcast, our objective is to empower our audience, which are high caliber fee-for-service professionals, to always be working on their business and on themselves, personally and professionally. On today's podcast, I had a very in-depth conversation with Jeff Savlov, a consultant to enterprising families. And Jeff is the founding principal of Blum and Savlov, LLC, which is a family business and wealth consulting firm. As a backdrop, Jeff's specialty is working with families who want their wealth to serve the current and future generations in healthy and productive ways, which, as we all know, is a substantial, growing, unmet need that has to be addressed. He engages families at the intersection of family dynamics and ownership, management, and leadership of shared assets. Jeff speaks in the U.S. and internationally and has been quoted in the New York Times, Family Business Magazine, and also authors a popular blog, The Family Business Minute. And in this episode, we discussed a philosophy and a process for how to engage a family into not just developing a continuity and succession plan, but also how to buy into ongoing fluid and dynamic planning. You can learn more about Jeff and contact him through his website at blumandSavlov.com. That's BLUMANDSAVLOV.com. As always, if you like this podcast, please like and share, tell your colleagues. And if you have any ideas or topics you would like to hear on this podcast down the road, just let us know. Thanks for listening. All right, we're going to hit on a very meaningful topic related to family dynamics. We have a thought leader and consultant to enterprising families named Jeff Savlov, who was actually introduced to us by one of our coaches, Scott Hamilton. Scott was adamant that we have this conversation. And this is a very, very meaningful topic in light of demography and all sorts of other forces regarding continuity and succession. So, Jeff, welcome to Always On. Thanks for being here.
No, thanks for having me. Adamant is pretty strong. Thanks, Scott, for that.
Well, I have a lot of respect for Scott, and he was not going to not let this happen. So I got to know you a little bit, and Scott gave me a nice backdrop. But what I thought I'd do for our audience is just come at this with W5. Okay, so here are the questions I'm going to ask you out of the gate. And then it's your challenge to make this interesting to the audience. So First of all, what do you do? Who do you do it for? When did you get started in this specific area? Why does the need exist? Where do you source your clients? And then, of course, how do you engage the entire family into your process? So let's start with the what, Jeff. What do you do specifically?
If it's okay, and I think this probably fits into more than one of these, I'd like to start with my background because it really sets the foundation for everything else and makes it make sense. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
And it probably fits into the when did I start? Why did the need exist? And a couple of others all in one. Grew up in a family business. My family had a commercial printing business in New York City. My dad was he was a blue collar guy, high school to the Army, learned printing in the Korean War, came back, worked for printers, saved his money, took out a home equity loan and everything he saved and risked it all, which I remember my parents having conversation about this. Partly I overheard some of it and was like, wow, this is big. And partly they told me and I thought, wow, they're telling me this directly and it's big and scary. And he risked it all. And it was clear that if it went well, things were going to be tough for a while. And if it didn't go well, things were going to be tough for a while, which as a 11-year-old, you're like, so where's the upside, mom and dad? I volunteered to be involved weekends whenever I could, more in high school, and then during and after college, a lot more. And my dad got in over his head. The business got really successful. It grew. I remember Porsche was one of our clients, and we had these wonderful high-end posters, advertising posters of beautiful cars. I was hanging in my room, and I was spending as much time as I could outside of middle school, then high school, then college. And the truth is, Dad was in way over his head. He was really stressed out. And Duncan, you want to take a guess who Dad took his frustrations out on?
He probably kept it inside.
Yeah, if only that were the case. He took it out on me. He was a yeller, and it was a lot of just really humiliating experiences of him yelling at me when he was really angry at something else or someone else. I was working hard, nose to the grindstone, never asked for a penny. I wasn't trying to make money off this. I was trying to help the family. My mom was wise. She saw what was going on, and she found a psychologist that specialized working with families, parents and kids, mostly in business together. She decided not to work just with me and my dad, but with the whole family, my mom and two sisters who weren't involved, which I thought was interesting because this seemed to be, to me, a Jeff and Dad problem. And this is really significant to how my career evolved. She said, this is a family issue. I want to talk to all of you. She did some amazing work. If we had more time on another call, I could get into the details of really what transformed in those sessions, but it was deep and personal and fulfilling, really helped me understand my dad in a new way. His life, talking about Latvia. We were talking about my name being Latvian before. Without getting too long-winded, my dad's father was the only one of his family to leave Latvia before World War II. We're Jewish. The whole family was wiped out. So part of understanding my dad's anger was that he was raised by a man who was completely traumatized, bereft of his whole family, really intense stuff. And all that came out and helped me understand my dad in a new way. Ultimately, that was an amazing experience. And I decided, one, I don't love commercial printing. I was doing this to help the family. Two, Dad, you and I are not going to have a really good father-son relationship if we work together. And for both of those reasons, I decided to leave. I went into the corporate world. I worked in sales and marketing, consumer products, technology sectors, had a really good run at a young age. But I was deeply moved by what that psychologist did for us. And I said, I want to do that for people. So that's part of the why I do this. If that's not one of the W's, it should be. Why in the world do you do this? Maybe we can add a W. So I trained as a family. I left the business world, went back to grad school, trained family and group dynamics, trained as a family therapist. I did 7 years postgraduate work in a psychoanalytic institute. So I'm trained as a psychoanalyst, which people don't do too much anymore. Along the way, I was trained not only to work with families and adults and teenagers, but very young children. And that also comes back in a really significant way in my career. 30 years ago, more or less, I started a private practice doing therapy, talk therapy, counseling. And early on, by coincidence, some of my clients, my therapy clients, had generational wealth or operating businesses or some combination. And I got to see in a very up close and personal way that when families share significant assets and they're trying to work together to transition from one generation to the next, either from ownership or even management and leadership, right? There's the ownership level where you can own stuff and not work there, as you know. And also we want our kids to be leaders of the business or managers, all those elements. It makes family life complex. And I like to say family is complex all on its own, right? Poor and working class families have complexity in their families. Wealthy families have it. When you combine the complexity that exists normally in a family with ownership of shared assets and how you're going to move forward with that, the complexity increases. And so I decided that I saw there was a need for something different than what therapists do. And my work as a consultant is different than therapy. But back then, 30 years ago, I said, there's a need for something that's not therapy, but lawyers, accountants, wealth managers aren't really trained in this family dynamic space. And so there's a need for something in the middle of all that where we can help families with understanding their family dynamics, how they communicate, and understand some of the opportunities and pitfalls around sharing wealth and transitioning it from one generation to the next. And I really dove in 30 years ago and really grew that to right now. That's where I'm super busy and where I spend my time. I have a small clinical practice where I continue to do therapy with clients that I've been seeing for a really long time, but my passion and my effort right now, it's working with, again, business families, legacy wealth families who don't even have an operating business. But when the wealth is so high, it's just like an operating business. You need leadership, you need governance. Governance is a big piece of what I do. And not so much governance as in like board of directors of a company, but governance in terms of how do we come together as a family and make decisions? Who's involved? How are we going to pick a leader? How do we share information? How does the next generation get educated, and how do we decide who gets involved and in what way? Who are owners that are kind of silently on the side, and how do we keep them informed about what's going on? And who are the owners that are going to have leadership positions, and how do we make those decisions? Often families in the past have made those decisions by saying, all right, we have 3 siblings in the second generation. They each have 3 kids. One of those kids from each family line has to be in an executive role, regardless of if they have the ability. That never worked out all that well. And so families really learned they had to come together and make decisions based on, what's best for the family, but also for the enterprise. And that takes a lot of tough conversations, especially if, one of those 3 siblings has 3 kids with MBAs that are really crackerjacks, and maybe the other 2 have kids that aren't interested or aren't competent. How do you define fairness, and how do you move forward in a situation like that? So I'm kind of throwing a lot at you, but that's sort of the background, the kinds of clients that I work with. You want me to take a break and ask a question? You want me to keep blowing through the W's?
Well, first of all, thank you for that. I can now see clearly why Scott was adamant. You covered a lot of ground there, but I really appreciate you giving us that backstory. I don't know your dad, but I have immense respect for him because I never thought of that era of being in their own sandwich. And by that, I mean, obviously, incredibly traumatic backstory of his own. And then the courage to risk it all. And then just getting immersed and not having a safety net. And probably not consciously using you as a lightning rod to channel his frustrations. He just needed to vent.
Yeah.
But it's a lonely world for an entrepreneur, especially first generation self-made.
Yeah.
And I think what I like the most is your early mentors being your mom and that psychologist, and how you latched on to the qualitative side, the bedside manner of the psychoanalyst value, because there's so much technical that I'm sure you cover. But I'm sure your clients, as much as they appreciate your core competency, they really appreciate the fact that you're coming from experience, not theory, but you focus on the emotional side. In this book, the Blue Square Method, I highlight the Q because the fee-for-service professional of the future balances quantitative value with qualitative. And I think you've landed in a really important sweet spot there. And that's probably why your phone is ringing off the hook.
Yeah, thanks. And one thing I would add is supporting that quantitative and qualitative. I was just got back from a week in Denver at the Purposeful Planning Institute, PPI.org. It's multidisciplinary. So there's wealth managers, there's philanthropic advisors, attorneys, accountants, people from behavioral science, and we all come together in this really cool kind of a way through really creative educational breakout sessions and really personal kind of small group and even dyadic exercises to learn how to integrate in the soft side, as it's called, or the qualitative aspects. And a lot of these people are doing very technical things, but they really see the importance of the qualitative or soft side. And the other thing I would say is, you mentioned my mom and the psychologist as mentors. Dad was more than a yeller. I might sort of frame it that way. But he certainly, there's something character building, and not that that's the way to build character in your kids, but there's something character building about having to deal with that and kind of keep your self-esteem together. But on another level, in terms of the qualitative, I remember being young and walking with my dad on a tennis court on the way to the paddleball courts. He was a paddleball guy with, the big cement wall and the 4 guys, hitting the heck out of that little black ball. And we're walking by the tennis players on the way to the paddleball court. And he said, "Good morning." And they all said, "Good morning." And I said, "Oh, Dad, I didn't know you know those guys." And he's like, "I don't." I said, "But you just said hello to them." He's like, "Yeah, it's a great thing to just say hello to whoever you met." or whoever you meet. And I'd say from that point on, I really say hello to anyone who walks by me. That's just a small example of one of the many good things I got from him. But there were some tough times. I just don't want to give the impression that it's only tough times.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Fair enough. And I mean, there's some things in life you cannot learn in a simulator. And for your dad to be so well-rounded, because kids watch, right? They pay attention. It's not just what they're told and what they learn formally. They pay very close attention to how parents conduct themselves. And entrepreneurs, I mean, one of the many reasons why I have so much respect for the first generation self-made affluents is because they're so accountable. Again, no safety net, nowhere to hide.
Yeah.
And they execute as best as they can, and they're always striving to refine and optimize what they do. So, okay, I've got some placeholders here I want to come back to. I did want to jump to this developing arena and community of professionals who are addressing this need. Who are some of your other early mentors beyond your mom and that psychologist? Who else did you study early to develop your own protocol and philosophy and approach?
So I just turned 57 this past Wednesday. There are people who are in their maybe 70s, early 80s, who were the first wave of people who really started to make this a field. So I spent 18 months, more or less, with Freda Hers Brown, her firm is Relative Solutions. She was a family therapist about 15 years ahead of me in the same town, Highland Park, New Jersey, where my therapy practice was. She saw the need for this, and she worked with Dick Beckhard, who was a management professor at the Sloan School at MIT. He was working with really wealthy families and was getting stuck with the family dynamics. She was a family therapist with a family therapy training institute who saw wealthy families from a family dynamics piece, but she didn't know a lot about the management and finance side. And they got together and started a study group that eventually turned into the Family Firm Institute, which is now 30 plus years in this field, and they have trainings for professionals of all orientations. So it's a really good thing for any of your folks who want to sort of further their education in this realm. The Family Firm Institute has some really good stuff. She was a mentor before I worked for her around 10, 11 years ago. I actually worked for her for about a year and a half, learned a ton from her, really smart woman, decided I liked my own solo practice better and went back. Jane Hilbert Davis is another one who's written a book that's widely used around family business consulting. Courtney Pullen, again, another person, wrote a book in the field, really experienced. He went from the management world, but he was trained as a family therapist, and he took all of that and went into this world of working with family. So there was my kind of personal life, parents and other mentors, and then some really significant folks who were at the earliest stages of this new field, who were about 15 years ahead of me, and they were formally mentors to me in some really significant ways. And, you know, when I worked for Freda Hers Brown, we had clients where there was 100 or 120 cousins in the fourth or fifth generation. Can you imagine 120 cousins making a decision about, do we give dividends or not give dividends? Do we keep the company or do we just sell it and all go our own ways? Because half of us never even met each other, or most of us don't even know 90% of the rest of the group. You need governance. And again, it's similar to the kind of governance you might think about when you're thinking about an operating business, but it's governance for the family. So regardless of what they own, operating business, legacy, wealth, you need types of governance. How do we come together as a family? When you get to that level where you've got 100 or more cousins, you need representative groups. You need a family council, for example, where you have members of the family. You decide where these family members, how you decide who gets to be on the family council. And the family council is between the larger family ownership group and maybe the board of directors of the company. So the family council organizes meetings to help the huge family ownership group understand and articulate what they want. For example, we're willing to be patient. This is a long-term play. Please tell the board of directors. And then the family council says, hey, we met with the family ownership group. We're willing to be patient. This is a long-term play. Or we don't have the patience. Many of us want to get out, find a way to have, 75 of those 100 people go their own way. The 25 remaining, we want to go forward, and we're willing to be patient. But you need some kind of mechanism. You can't just have 100 people calling the CEO and going wild, and that's not unheard of.
Okay, I want to jump ahead to the end, and I'm going to put you on the spot because I'm curious. Do you have any resources like a checklist or something that an advisor, a financial advisor, could use to start to get his or her head around the concept of having a conversation with an affluent client about some of these issues? Is there something like that that you have? And we can talk more about that later if you do, but I'm just putting you on the spot.
Yeah. No, I write a very popular blog, and I write about that from different angles. And I'm certainly happy to share some blog posts that are relevant. Another thing is the Family Firm Institute, which I mentioned. It's multidisciplinary. So regardless of whether you're an accountant, a lawyer, a psychologist, they have trainings in family business advising and family wealth advising. And it's really about learning about this field and how to jump in a responsible way and really learn about the sort of the different elements and what it takes to go this route. So I'm happy to send blog posts. The Family Firm Institute and those trainings are excellent. I know accountants and attorneys personally who have gone to places like the Bowen Center for Family Therapy in DC or the Ackerman Institute for Family Therapy in New York City. These are family therapy training centers where they train family therapists, but they also have programs to teach lawyers, accountants, wealth managers how to facilitate families, how to understand enough about family dynamics that you really take yourself a good level above the accountants and attorneys and wealth managers that don't have that kind of training. So something as simple as having family meetings where you don't just have mom and dad, but you have the teenagers or the kids in their early 20s involved and knowing how to handle that and the kinds of things that come up. So those are three sort of good opportunities for further learning that I can put out there that are really specific.
Okay, great. And I'll come back to that toward the end. Let's get back on track and give this some structure.
Yeah.
Back to W5 and the how. So let's just start with the table stakes on the what. Like, what is your value proposition? If you were to have a conversation with an affluent client, how would you position your value and your relevance to them? Sort of in a couple of minutes, what statement would you make?
The pain is some element around or some element of concern that the financial wealth or the operating business or both survive in a really productive way for future generations, and also that the family relationships are harmonious. And that's really the crux of it. The folks who I'm talking with, whether it's parents of kids or grandparents with grandkids, or nowadays grandparents with great grandparents with several generations beneath them. It's some element of that in a nutshell. They want the business or the other investments that they put together and built to survive and to really be fruitful and serve the family in productive ways. And they want the family to be able to stay close. And shared ownership of wealth strains both of those things, the business and financial success and the family success. So people who reach out to me, look, I'm not a finance expert. I don't do investments or tax or trust and estates, but I sort of coordinate with all those professionals. And this piece that I do was missing for a long time. You had all these silos looking at, how to protect wealth, how to avoid taxes, but nobody was saying, how do we build the family and make sure the family is strong? How do we prepare the inheritors or young children who are going to inherit in 20 or 30 years? How do we prepare them for this? One piece of my background that I forgot to mention, which is really significant, I mentioned that as a therapist, I was trained to work with really young children. I developed something called the Purposeful Legacy Family Project. And I work with couples before they even have children and when the kids are under 5 years old. And this is, plenty of people have gotten comfortable with 20-year-olds being involved in these discussions, or even high school kids. Some people are dealing with middle schoolers. I'm a firm believer that if you're not doing the right things with 2 and 3-year-olds, that you're not putting the proper foundation together for someone who's going to be a future steward of wealth. And I put a lot of time and energy into helping educate families around what do you do with a 2 or a 3-year-old to help them be a future steward of wealth. And it's really powerful stuff.
Okay, well, I want to come back to that because I'm thinking immediately, I don't have grandkids yet. Hopefully they start showing up at some point.
Yeah.
But I've got to assume that if I'm the founder of a company and I've got my own kids who are adults, and I understand that that's part of your value proposition, just emotionally, I'm probably thinking, okay, that is something I'd like to get out in front of, not just for my own business and my own legacy, but for my kids and for my eventual grandkids. Is that something that's put on the table and people acknowledge?
Yeah, I've had grandparents reach out to me to say, hey, I've created a significant wealth. My kids grew up when I was still creating the wealth. So the kids kind of grew up in the blue collar, hardworking, and they weren't affected by the wealth until they were much older. But my grandkids are being spoiled silly. Can you talk with me and my kids about their kids, my grandkids, and different variations? Another variation of that is a lawyer who knows me, and I don't think ever totally understood what I did, but he thought there was something cool about it. He was at a Tiger 21 meeting, which you might have heard of Tiger 21. He was at a meeting, and are you familiar? Do you need me to explain it?
Explain it. I've heard of it, but yeah, feel free to explain it.
It's a group of private investors. They pay a lot of money to be part of a group. There's a professional chair who's had real success in their own private investments. And it's groups of 10 to 15 people who do their own private investing, and they help each other evaluate their investments. But even Tiger 21 is going way beyond the quantitative, and they're getting into this realm. So I was given a talk there, and I've gotten to know a bunch of them, and a lawyer who's in Tiger 21 and knows me. And again, I wasn't sure he totally got it, but he, in his group, when I wasn't there, a new member was coming and was introducing himself. And this new member said, hey, when I was 28, I had my first, liquidity event, left with $30 million. I just had my second liquidity event at age 35, and I left with $600 million. I have a 1-year-old, and my wife is pregnant, giving birth next week. All I can think about is, how do I raise kids who are not assholes? Excuse my language, beep that out if necessary, but that's exactly what he said. The lawyer who knows me and never quite got it said, I think this is what Jeff's been talking about, and said, hey, I know a guy this is his specialty. What do you do when you have a newborn baby and a 1-year-old and incredible wealth, and you want kids to just be down to earth, humble human beings? And that guy called me right away. So it could be the grandfather, or it could be the father of a 1-year-old whose wife's pregnant. He's like, this is dangerous stuff. And it is, Duncan. It is potentially dangerous if you don't do it the right way. But there is a right way, and there's plenty of good you can do. And that's some of my favorite engagements to jump into, is helping really enlightened parents who are like, let's think this through.
I do appreciate the technical term, how you identified that one group, because I've met a few of those, and it is good to try to engineer an environment where that's avoided.
Right.
It's interesting, though. I never really thought about, because I know a lot of the thought leaders in this space, like Richard Watts, who wrote Entitlemania, they talk about, Richard talks about, how to avoid entitlement, but also how to unwind it if it's seeped in. But I really do like this notion of sort of dig your well before you're thirsty, get out in front of it, get at it early. And I am fascinated by why affluence, especially self-made, first generation, kicks that can down the road. And maybe it's because they're so fixated on getting to the inflection point that they put things off, and they just assume that, we'll get to it eventually. But your concept is, let's get on it now.
Yeah, and that's the way the field is going. I mean, 50, 75 years ago, you had to wait for somebody to die, and a lawyer read a piece of paper that said who's going to be the president and who's getting nothing. And nobody was prepared. Nobody knew what was coming. Over time, in the last 30 years, it's gotten more progressive. And now, to the point where at least some people are willing to think about parenting before they have kids, or when their kids are still toddlers. I think in the past, there was a fear if you talk about it, nothing good will come of it. And a lot of people felt that. So they said it's better to say nothing. But doing nothing doesn't really prepare anyone for what's coming their way. So you had people inheriting, whether it was 20 or 40 or 50 years old, unbelievable amounts of money. They didn't know who the professionals were. They didn't know how to invest it. They didn't know what it meant for their lives. It was really awful. So now there's really the tide has turned, and more families are looking for this. They're looking for their professionals to either provide it in their firms, and I see accounting firms are trying to buy practices like mine and colleagues of mine, and some of them have sold out and gone and worked full time for an accounting firm or a law firm, or even all the big wealth management firms have some built-in family dynamics and governance. That wasn't the case 10 or 12 years ago. No. So people are catching on.
Well, I got to assume that for a wealth management firm or a financial services team, having this degree of value add would amplify their fee worthiness. because it is an unmet need and it is so emotionally important. But having structure and having a process, not just an intention, probably would make a big difference. So I'll come back to that. So got the what. Now let's talk about the who. Who is your ideal client? Who is the ideal family you work with?
Ideally, it's say 20 million at the low end. So a minimum of 20 million of net worth and well above that. If you want to say ideal, it's 100 million and above, but even 20 million at the low end, or an operating business, 25-30 million in revenues. Again, that's at the low end. Ideal is several hundred million or above. But having said that, I'm working with a family now that the revenues of the business is 5 million. No one makes more than 200,000 in the second or third generation. And they really had a big mess in terms of the dynamics between them. They weren't communicating. There was a lot of issues lingering from the founder, both the founder and his wife who died. And I was able to be really helpful to them. So I'm kind of giving you a wide range, but I was able to be really helpful to them. And they were hungry enough to pay the fees. But if you want to say ideal, it's 20 million in net worth and above, 20 million in revenues of a business and well above that. And the main thing is that you've got families who either currently own something together or they're going to be owning it together when somebody dies or sooner. And they really want this piece that I talked about earlier, which is they want the business or the financial wealth to grow and succeed. And they want healthy, productive future generations who get along and love each other and can work together.
To position yourself as a subject matter expert while efficiently creating professional contrast in the eyes of your prospective clients, strategic partners, and ideal clients, deploy a podcasting initiative using the turnkey process developed by Proudmouth. Learn more at proudmouth.com. Do you aspire to consistently attract and keep great clients while driving the enterprise value of your business? Do you want to achieve professional contrast by supplementing your technical ability with a consistent client experience driven by best practices? The Blue Square Toolkit brings the proven Pareto Systems philosophy and process to life in a way that tethers your team so that you can competitor-proof your clients, gain their full empowerment, and attract quality referrals, all while restoring liberation and order in your life, and all in an intuitive, easy-to-use, turnkey solution. Visit bluesquaretoolkit.com to get your 14-day free trial today. You touched on the when in terms of when you started. That's great. Was the printing company sort of in its groove? Was that in the 80s?
Yeah, late 80s. New York, the real estate in New York was still cheap, and New York was having a tough time. And so you could afford, it was the printing capital of the world on Varick Street. And then as New York started to rebound, prices went up for real estate, and it just didn't make any sense. We were renting, and a lot of the printing left New York. And my dad actually closed it down when he sort of retired. He could have moved it to another part of the world. He didn't want any of that. So he just kind of walked away from it. And there's very little printing left.
Yeah, of course, with digital, of course.
Yeah.
So I'm going to add an element to the when, and you touched on this too, and that is when should somebody start to address this? And I guess it's like anything else. It's a form of pay yourself first, get on this early so that you can avoid the cautionary tale and avoid those hassles, when they're just really hard to unwind. So any thoughts on the when?
You're not going to be shocked to hear me say the sooner the better. I wrote an article about conversations you can have with kids in elementary and middle school about the family business, which really relates to family wealth without an operating business as well. But it was an article written in Family Business Magazine. Happy to share it, link to it. But it's elementary and middle school kids. And you're not telling them, ideally, you're not telling them you're going to run this one day or you're going to own this one day. That's a big mistake. But you can say, hey, we have this. What do you think it would be like to work with your brothers and and sisters together. Could you guys work together? Do you think all three of you could be the president or the head person? Can you have three head persons, or do you think you need one? You're not making this decision with an 8 or 9-year-old, but they're smart enough to say, that's interesting. It might be hard to make a decision with three people. Okay, so what if we picked one of you? How do you think the other two would feel? What do you think that would be like? And you're just giving them a little bit of a sense of what kinds of questions are coming their way. You're not making decisions at that age, but you're really letting them know you're part of something that's bigger than just you. And these are the kinds of things we're going to have to think through. Same thing with the example I gave about the guy who had a pregnant wife and a 1-year-old. That's a great one to start. Many people start later. So one of the clients that I just talked about, the $5 million in revenues business that was working with me, the parents were 98 years old. 98 years old, still had full control, full ownership. The kids were 70, two brothers at 70 and 71, and they still didn't have full ownership. Both parents died during the first year of this engagement. At 98, you're probably not shocked, but talk about waiting till the last minute. And then the third generation was already in their 40s, and they're looking at their 70-year-old father and uncle and saying, we're in our 40s, they're in their 70s, and they still don't have control. It's just insane. So that is certainly not ideal. But other starting points was just really a better answer. I have people reach out. Mother and father have started a business, entrepreneurial couple. Their kids are in their 20s, in college, really doing a good job. And they're starting to think about, do we let the kids in? And what if all of them come in? What if one comes in and the others don't? Help us think through how to do this. How do we be fair to the kids who don't work there, but we want them to have a piece of what we created? And so all those things are tricky. And there's conversations there that I'm sure that your listeners get into, all the time. There's really great technical ways to, use insurance to help cover, some kind of fairness and estate equalization with the kids who don't work there. But other families will give a third ownership to each of the three kids, even the two that don't work there. Well, what does that feel like when maybe the company gets sold and the guy who's been there for 20 years and grew it gets the same amount as his brother and sister who never set foot in there? So a lot of what I do when they come to me with the kids in the 20s who are still in college is, let's think through some of these scenarios and look at the emotional ramifications and the family dynamic ramifications. How is your daughter who grew it for those 20 years when the brother and sister didn't work there, how is she going to feel if this really, really grows 10 times and is sold and she gets the same third as the brother and sister that were never there? And usually when the other brother and sister are included in that conversation, they could step in. The ones that aren't working there, and so they usually say, yeah, that doesn't sound fair. There must be a better way. And there's nothing better for future estate planning success than having the various beneficiaries in the room early saying, this is our definition of fairness, and we all agree. And that's really a nugget in this, is when you have an open conversation as a family about all these scenarios and intricacies, and I can point out some of the pitfalls emotionally and business-wise. And as a family, with your professionals, you look at all the factors, tax, and all these other elements, including family and family harmony, and then you put together a much better plan. There's a great article, if you Google Harvard Business Review Fair Process. Harvard Business Review Fair Process. The first hit is an article, really short, and it's research on how people are much more satisfied when they are given a chance to be part of a decision and the discussion of a decision, even if they don't get their way. It's beautiful. And I think that's the essence of my work. When people are given a chance to have a voice, even if it doesn't go their way, they're much more likely to be satisfied that they were part of a process that felt fair and they felt heard. And that is so much of what I do. I like to say to the senior generation all the time, a voice does not equal a vote. Allowing your kids or grandkids to have some say in how they feel and what they think about what's going to happen to them, because you are doing things that are going to happen to other people. Giving them a voice doesn't mean they get a vote, but if you really listen to them genuinely and you're willing to even show some flexibility when you get a lot of feedback in the same direction, that's how you really protect yourself in the future. It's not writing a better estate plan. There's a lawyer in Chicago that works with ultra high net worth families, really good guy, and he likes to say, two parents who come to him desperate because their 20-year-olds are messing up everything, he'll say to them, I cannot do on paper what you have been unable to do in 25 years of raising your own children, which is a really harsh thing to say. You need to be pretty darn busy to say that to a new client, like so busy that you don't need them. But there's honesty right there. It's so true. I can't do on paper what you couldn't do in 25 years of raising your kids. And not enough technical professionals are saying that kind of thing. Too many families are asking for insane solutions on paper for problems that require some really skilled facilitation, and maybe the parents falling on their sword and saying, kids, we made some bad mistakes and we need to take a look at how we've set things up and really think this through.
And not irreparable. We can unwind some of those, but I do like the
sometimes.
Yeah. Well, I know last time we talked, you talked about things that are too far gone, and we'll come to that in a second, but it's interesting. I know from personal experience, entrepreneurs tend to internalize some of their issues because they don't want to be a burden to their family. So they just keep it inside. They don't want to spread it around. And there's pros and cons to that, of course, but I'm getting to why the need exists for this. It's interesting. Back when my kids were younger, I traveled extensively, and I would take the entire family, or I'd take one of my kids with me on a trip. And so I'd do my thing, but then we'd have some time to visit the city and just hang together. And it was great. I remember one of my kids, and he was at the time probably 10, and we went to New York and we had some downtime. We went down to Wall Street, and I kind of explained to him what I did. And we went down and saw the Fearless Girl statue and the bull. And I was telling him, this is the hub. And he asked me about the bull. And I just sort of glanced off the fact that the horns point up, bull market, and the paw sweeps down. That's the bear market. Didn't give it a second thought. A couple of years later, he did a presentation or some type of report on financial planning, and he referenced that. So obviously the experience and the message just happened to catch him at the right time. And my takeaway from that is, I don't think you can start too young with just acquainting them and engaging them in the process, or in just the learning of that. So, but here's actually my question. I'm curious, is there a big distinction if you've got a client who's achieved their big event, big complex needs, big numbers, but the kids aren't going to be involved in the business, but there's obviously still a lot of money and it's going to go into motion at some point? Is that easier for you, or does it make no difference? I mean, what's the distinction between somebody who's going to bring the kids into the business versus not, even though the money's big?
Yeah, there's not necessarily a distinction. One of the things that tends to happen is when there's a big liquidity event, often the family wasn't living in such a wealthy lifestyle. Not all the time, but sometimes. And they may just have stuck with the sort of blue collar or even, middle class, upper middle class kind of neighborhood they were in while the wealth was being built and grown. And so that's kind of an interesting dynamic where the kids they really didn't see too much of it. Maybe they knew that, okay, we're solidly upper middle class, like our friends whose parents are lawyers or doctors, but then they don't realize, there's $100 million or $200 million payday coming. And that's a much different lifestyle depending on how you use it. And they're already in their 20s or 30s, and they've gone to high school and college and just knew that they were going to have to find their own way. And it wasn't really an issue. So often the kids have not been so affected by the idea of wealth and the kind of entitlement that it could bring. It doesn't always bring, but it could. So that's one scenario. When the kids are going to be in the business, it depends on, there's the family who has them, involved from a very young age. When I do some of my talks about what do you do with a 2-year-old who's going to be a future steward of wealth, I have 2 videos of 2-year-olds. One is a 2-year-old boy who is so diligent in taking empty water bottles off the truck and then carrying them into the little warehouse and piling them up in a really diligent way. It's unbelievable. The guy's 2 years old. And after he does one, he goes back and he takes one in each hand. Like, he's so hungry to contribute, and he's 2 years old. He doesn't even know the meaning of money or anything. He's just like, this is my family. I'm going to contribute. The other video is a 2-year-old girl whose parents got her a nice little mini kitchen in their kitchen, and she's chopping vegetables, she's washing vegetables, she's setting the table, she serves at a little table and chairs for her parents, she cleans it up. When she spills water on the floor, she says, "Uh-oh," she laughs, she takes a little rag, she wipes it up, she makes her own mess, she cleans it up. And I show those 2 videos and I say to people, what did you just see here that tells you everything you need to know about raising future stewards, future inheritors of wealth? And this is what it is. They don't even understand money, but they are getting a sense of, this is my family, this is what we do, this is how we contribute. And so the family, so to answer your question about the difference between, maybe a big kind of payday versus the business, either way, the parents who are doing that stuff with young kids are going to have wonderful kids, even if they go off to be artists or doctors or accountants or, deli owners. If they're doing those little things, you're going to have someone who's honest, has integrity, is going to be responsible with whatever they're given. They're going to have a sense of appreciation and gratitude. And you know what? This is true, Duncan, for poor and working class families. 90% of what I teach in this realm of raising kids and wealth, 90% of it makes just as much sense for poor and working class families. It's the safety net that high net worth and ultra high net worth families have, a safety net that can actually be too strong. And so when little mistakes are handled by parents jumping in and saving a little bit, and then bigger mistakes as they get older are handled with a little bit more money, jumping in and saving things. Poor and working class families, they don't have that. Reality comes calling, and there is no safety net, and they have to sink or swim. So that's really a big difference. So much of what affects parenting and wealth is the safety net is too strong, and you have to build in challenge, and you have to build in resilience through difficult tasks.
That was an indelible lesson I got from The Millionaire Next Door. And it was very sobering, because Tom Stanley said that it's very common for first-generation self-made affluence to shield the next generation from hardship. And, I'm guilty of this, where I just wanted my kids to have fun and to play and to socialize. And back to your point about the 2-year-old with the water bottles, instilling that pride and productivity early, it's cause and effect. You're not even showing them what the outcome is, just immersing them in the activity. And I say that because there are times where I tried to delegate to one of my kids a task, but I was so fixated on the quality control that I just said to myself, no, I'll just do it. And just to make sure the outcome was there, but I'm depriving them of the ability to immerse themselves in that productivity. And that's your point about the safety net. The unintended consequences becomes a hammock of complacency, and that's probably the birthplace for entitlement.
That's right great. There. Safety net becoming a hammock. I never heard that, but I love it. And that's really great. Did you just make that up?
No, actually, I've heard that from a couple of different people, but the first time I heard it was around the same time I was reading The Millionaire Next Door, and it was actually Rush Limbaugh who talked about it. And then I've heard it in a couple of other different contexts in athletics and things like that. But bottom line is, leadership is about handing the torch, being at peace with the outcomes, and just instilling the pride and productivity and the cause that leads to effects. The rest will sort of come into play. But I wanted to ask you where you're sourcing your clients, because my community is primarily, as you know, fee-for-service financial professionals. Mm-hmm. I keep saying to them, articulate your value around what a client wants, not what you do. What you do is commoditized. What they want is aspirational, and just get them to connect how you get them to what they want. And bottom line is, what a client wants is liberation and order. They want to be liberated to go live their life knowing that it's being addressed, and they want order knowing that there's a process, that they're not cobbling it together. Do you have a similar mindset in trying to help a client to understand the liberation and order that comes from addressing this early?
Yeah, I mean, it comes up in the first meeting. A lot of sort of sales theoreticians, sales experts will say that you really got to get to pain. Humans aren't going to do much unless there's pain. And I'm a believer in that for my psychoanalytic education. And I've done a lot of work. A colleague of mine is a Sandler sales trainer, and I've done a lot of work with him. It's all about pain first. And so that comes up in the first meeting. A lot of the people that go through Sandler that I've seen, or any other kind of sales training, they sort of struggle with how to get the pain to surface. With me, I gotta put a lid on it. Usually there's so much high pain early on when I'm having a discussion. And I talk about everything from parenting. I talk about parenting as a form of governance. So under the umbrella of governance, that's the liberation and the order. Are you thinking about how you're raising your kids, how you're communicating from a young age? As they get older, are you teaching them about money, about the business, about the wealth? Part of how I put order on all that is this idea that you can talk about family wealth without talking about money. And you can talk about money without mentioning numbers. Really take that in. You can talk about family wealth without even talking about money. And then you can talk about money without mentioning numbers. How do you talk about family wealth without talking about money? Tell the story of, like in my case, Grandpa had the guts to run away. His whole family got killed. He didn't know that was going to happen, but Grandpa ran away. He went to Mexico. We're Jewish. He sold rosary beads in Mexico City because supposedly the Catholics weren't allowed to sell rosaries. So a bunch of Jewish guys got together and sold rosaries. He made enough money to get to America, and he drove a subway for the rest of his life. And an interesting part of this story, and this is what I told my kids, but my point here is storytelling. How do you talk about family wealth without talking about money? Tell them the stories. So Grandpa drove a subway, and you know what happened? He was able to retire at like 60 or 62. But the way that the New York subway system worked, you would get like 90% or whatever it was, 70%, whatever percentage of your final year working as a subway driver for the rest of your life. So and there was no rule about what you did that final year. So these guys worked 70 hours, 80 hours a week for their final year working. And then they got 80% of that. And he got paid more in retirement every year than he ever did when he drove a subway. And it's kind of a cool money smarts lesson in there. But the guy went from genocide to, financial brilliance. And the guy lived to 96. He lived 36 years on a salary he never should have been getting. That's how you talk about family wealth without talking about money. You tell stories about the things that people went through. And it's really important that they have an element of hardship, the genocide and escaping it, but also an element of success and the brilliance of working 70 hours and then living another 36 years. And there's research on this stuff about the importance of telling stories, the power of telling family stories, but the need to also not just show the good parts, but also the low parts and balancing it out. That's really powerful for kids. And that helps to put order, helping parents to tell stories, to talk to kids about what's happening, to prepare them incrementally for what's coming their way. Really helps parents put order on that.
Well, I've been saying, I totally agree. I've been saying for years, facts tell, stories sell. And that's not to trivialize someone's technical ability, but a prospective client, if you want your value to be bought, not sold, like you're not convincing them, but they're buying in. If you tell a story that they can identify with and relate to, even in their inside voice, they're drawn, they're attracted to the ability to address that. I really like what you said there about not even getting into the numbers. I remember saying to a kid of a friend, we were talking about financial independence. And I said to him, financial independence is when you get to a point where your money makes more money than you do. And so, no number. It wasn't like, oh, you got $5 million or whatever. It was just a concept of competing for income. Like you generate an income based on your effort and your labor, put your money to work. And, anybody who's read The Richest Man in Babylon, fundamentally sound book for youngsters around the concept of pay yourself first and averaging and all of that. But that's the sort of the goal. So I really like that. I'm curious, back to how you engage a family. I was just at a conference in San Diego, and I was talking to an advisor about the difference between a financial plan and financial planning. So financial plan is the document, the blueprint, sort of the checklist, all the things that we need to address. Financial planning is where the future pacing comes in. These are the mile markers. These are the things that we want to get out in front of and address as your life unfolds and your needs become more complex. How do you get someone bought in within a family, especially when you're in the intergenerational aspect of the conversation? How do you engage everybody?
So, the pain piece, like I said, it comes up early. Whoever reaches out, it could be the youngest member of the youngest generation. It could be the oldest member of the senior generation, but there's pain around. Mm-hmm. We're going to lose the money that has been created. We're going to lose the business, both money and business, and the family piece. So up front, it's interesting when someone refers someone to me, it's usually a single person writing an email. And I typically say in a very polite way, the best way to really start this process is to get all the significant people. I mean, yes, if it's 100 cousins, we're not getting on a Zoom call, but if I can get, 5, 6, 7 of the key people, or if it's smaller, 3, 4 people together on a call, there's no charge. I'll take an hour. Let's see if you like what I'm about and if I think I have something to offer. And then we have that conversation. And it's immediately clear at the end of that hour if they're interested in me and if I have something to offer them. And then we're really off and running. The next thing I do is I tell them I'm still not agreeing to work with you guys. I need to learn more than just an hour can tell me. I'll spend a half day live. And this is all over the country. I ask for a nominal fee, pay my travel expenses, and I'm going to come, and I'm still not agreeing to work with you, and I'm not asking you to agree to work with me, but I'll spend a half day. And that's when the magic happens. That's when I can show them how I can help them have conversations. I can facilitate conversations they never thought they were going to have, certainly not this early in an engagement where they haven't even hired me yet. It's not even an engagement. And that's where the magic happens, that half day. I can meet with the senior generation, the junior generation. I can interview siblings separately. I really get what I need to know. Early in my career, I would do the 1 hour free Zoom call, and then I'd send a proposal. And I really didn't know enough. This has been a real game changer for me in terms of setting things up. And then by the end of that half day, I can take 20 minutes and say, here's how you got into the situation. Here's the history of your family. Here are the dynamics at play. I can also alleviate a lot of the shame. Families typically feel shame and embarrassment that, look, we have all this wealth and success financially, but our family's a mess. Well, every family's a mess, so you're not alone there. But let me explain to you, there's something different about families that have a business or wealth of some sort. And I can alleviate the shame so that they don't leave beating themselves up and they actually feel like, oh, this is normal stuff and there's a way for us to manage it. And then I start to lay out some of the things and then I write a proposal, but I'm sort of helping them see that what you feel ashamed of is sort of normal for families in this situation, but we know how to go forward from here, and here's how I can help.
Back to the liberation and order. But I love that in that it's not a sales encounter. It's stewardship. It's very pure. And it's not a tactic around playing hard to get when you have a fit process. It's let's make sure there's an alignment between what you need and your willingness to actually act on what I'm going to prescribe. I love that. It's funny, you talk about the pain point. You probably heard the whole premise that in business development and marketing, it's problem, agitate, solve. So present a problem, agitate the problem, and then offer to solve the problem. And I had a flashback of a financial advisor who was early trying to get his son to start thinking about coming to work for dad in the family business. And it just wasn't landing. The kid in his, if I remember correctly, mid to late teens, got a job and he got his first paycheck. And there was tax taken off. And so he had sticker shock. Looking at his stub, and it's like, what? He did not understand the concept of tax. And it opened up a conversation where the dad said, look, that's a big part of our process is tax avoidance, minimizing tax. And then, of course, the conversation led to not just as you're earning the money, but once the numbers get big and more complex and goes into motion. And it just built some predisposition amongst the kid to start thinking about all the nuances of money. So problem, agitate, solve is a very good model.
Yeah.
This is a great conversation. You covered a lot of ground, but in the spirit of time, where can people find you and where can people find your resources? So not only they can get to know you, but they can actually deploy some of this, because I'm just going to say, for financial advisors who want to go up market and be attractive to very attractive clients, you've got to go beyond just the technical ability of asset management and add in this qualitative deliverable. It's becoming the biggest unmet need for sophisticated, high caliber clients. So, Jeff, where can someone go to consume your thought leadership and your content, and then perhaps even develop a relationship with you?
Yeah, I would just add, you just kind of reminded me that I do coaching for financial advisors and trainings for firms, which I just didn't mention that. And I just recently, it's a firm I'm sure everyone on this call would know. They're an RIA. They consider themselves a family office in New York City. You probably would know them. And two of the top advisors were noticing that they just weren't landing as many of the prospects as they had hoped. So they were getting a good pipeline, but they were only maybe landing half. Well, they would love to get 3/4 or more. And so we had a conversation, and there was something psychological going on around wealth with the half that wasn't engaging. And I had some ideas about how I could coach them before they had these sort of sales calls, prospect calls. And after, usually they take a few calls. After each call, I would jump in with them and sort of coach them on some of the psychological aspects of what was happening that they weren't seeing and where the opportunities were to engage. And that's a really recent thing that that kind of an engagement. I do the training and education a lot. That specific setup was new and really interesting because of the way it came together. In terms of how to get in touch with me, it's, Jeff Savlov, Savlov. The website is blumandSavlov.com. And that's really the best way. I've redid my website a few years ago. So there's a lot of educational blogs, there's articles, there's case studies, and there's just a lot you can learn about the field. Like I was talking about the Purposeful Planning Institute, the Family Firm Institute, and, there's a lot of good stuff on there.
Great stuff. And we'll put links in the description as we distribute this conversation. It's interesting. I've been saying to advisors for a long time to outsource as much as you can to liberate yourself to go deeper into areas that really matter with the client. I know there are some advisors that are pursuing adding these designations into their skill set, which is fantastic. But I have to think that if I'm a financial advisor trying to build out my business, it's probably not a bad idea to just engage other service providers like yourself into their process, and then communicate that to their clients as a value-added service and an introduction they can make. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, it's really a collaborative field, both the Family Firm Institute and the Purposeful Planning Institute that I mentioned a couple of times. The word collaboration is everywhere on sort of their websites and their educational stuff, because no one professional can sort of do all of it. So it's so important to collaborate and understand the kind of client you want to get, how you want to serve them, and then establish relationships with people who have the expertise if you don't have it, or you don't want to take the time to get it. Any financial advisor can do some of the things I'm suggesting, like the Family Firm Institute, certificates in wealth advising or family business advising. But if you want to sort of do the work at the level that I'm at, psychoanalytic certification, family therapist, 30 years of doing it, you really want to take 30 years, or do you want to collaborate? So knowing what you're good at, knowing what you want to learn and what you want to take on, and then use collaboration to grow from there.
And I just want to remind everybody about the balance. Everybody talks about the trillions of dollars that are going to be changing hands in the next 10 years from one generation to the next, which is big. And you want to have an approach and a process that can address those issues. But the qualitative side, avoiding the cautionary tales and being an exemplary model in terms of how a family got out in front of these big issues and addressed them as best they could, following a sound philosophy and process. This is going to become something that's going to be very substantial over the next 10 years and beyond. So, Jeff, I really appreciate your time. This has exceeded my expectations in terms of the ground we covered, and we'll have to have you back. I do want to hear some stories about wins and setbacks. on our next conversation, but This is a very good start. Thanks very much.
Yeah, Duncan, thanks for having me. Happy to come back. And I got stories. I mean, if I have nothing else, I've got stories.
Yeah, no doubt. So let's get those organized for part 2 of this conversation down the road. And Scott Hamilton, if you're listening, thanks for the introduction. You were right. I'm glad you were so persuasive because this is such a great area to cover. So thank you. We'll talk to you next time, and go Devils? No, go Rangers.
Rangers. Let's go Rangers. Take care. Thanks, Duncan.
I think it might be a little quiet for the Rangers going forward.
Yeah, it's been quiet for most of the last 100 years, except for one little blip.
Thanks to the Oilers, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, because you mean all the guys that the Rangers took from the Oilers? Yeah,
wasn't it 6 or 7 former Oilers on that cup-winning team?
I've just had this conversation with someone. Yeah, it was really, let's just take a team that can do it and buy them, But there's justice, because even though the Rangers have the money to do that, they rarely, win the cup or even do all that well. So I don't feel
Okay, let me see, test your memory, because I was just at a little party yesterday, and Martin Jelena was there, who was on the Vancouver Canucks team. And I believe, was it Game 7 that Pavel Bure hit the crossbar that could have sealed the game? Was that to tie the game or to seal the game? And then the Rangers came back and won. Do you remember?
No, I remember Pavel Bure. I remember all that. Didn't he also have a penalty shot in that series that was incredible? And Mike Richter stuck his leg out and stopped it. And
you're right.
The save heard around the world. I remember both of those, but no more detail than that. But yeah, it was a little cheesy that they just bought the championship team and stuck them on. But I was still happy to win one.
Neil Smith, the GM, was very open about it. When he was interviewed after they won, he said, "I'd like to thank the Edmonton Oilers." So I admire him for that.
Yeah. That's
okay.
Funny.
Awesome, yeah. Jeff. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, man.
See you next time.
Thank you for listening to Always On with Duncan MacPherson, where our objective is to enable professionals to always be working on their business and on themselves. Want to learn more about Duncan and his team? Visit ParetoSystems.com. Don't forget to click the follow button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the hosts and/or guests and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Pareto Systems. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. This podcast is powered by Proudmouth, the Influence Accelerators. If you're like me and want to spend more time educating people and less time selling, Proudmouth helps turn Main Street experts like you into trusted mainstream authorities. They will help amplify your influence over a growing audience of magnetically attracted fans. Visit proudmouth.com to learn more.